Penguin Random House Audio presents The Frightened Ones by Dima Wannous. Translated from the Arabic by Elizabeth Jaquette. Read for you by Mozhan Marnò. Exactly 15 years ago, I was sitting in Camille's office. Camille, are you reading this now? Does the number 15 ring a bell? 15 years, Camille. Most people would say all these years. Though you, in my dreams, talk about just 4.5 years as all these years. I was sitting in Camille's really tiny waiting room, which stretched and swelled to fit dozens of patients. A few people came for appointments they'd made weeks before, or even earlier, but most came from outside Damascus without having booked. They sat on chairs scattered around the room and spilled onto the narrow steps outside. I smoked and watched them. The secretary, Layla, who was unusually sweet, was reading some lectures she'd printed out, studying diligently for her exams. Every so often, she'd steal a glance at me and smile. Layla. She probably had things on her mind, even while she was so kind to everyone. A person can be both troubled and sweet. She was young, working her way through college, supporting her family, which suffered like so many others. When Layla's father died, her mother came down with all kinds of health problems. She'd been an active woman and pretty, flitting through life with her svelte 50-something body. Then her husband passed away and she began to suffer from high blood pressure, diabetes, kidney disease, and hypothyroidism. She became a limp, bedridden thing. Layla's divorcee sister and her 2-year-old daughter lived with them. There was also a brother, but he had lost his mind years earlier. What had happened was that at the age of 21, he fell in love with a student at the College of Fine Arts. That's where I'd studied, too. The girl he admired was the daughter of a low-ranking officer from the Meze 86 neighborhood. One day, another boy, whose father was an intelligence officer, happened to see this same girl at college. Layla didn't tell me which agency the father worked for. That part wasn't important. The point was that the boy fell for her, too, and wanted to take her on a date to his father's rest stop. That's what kids of government officials call the gardens on the edge of Damascus, reserved for high-ranking officers. Somewhere they can go in their free time and spend days off with their families. She turned him down. By this point, she and Layla's brother were dating. Then, one morning, Layla's brother was kidnapped in the street. He disappeared for a whole week and returned an empty shell. They hung him from his feet for days, left him upside down until his mind poured out to the last drop, she told me. I remember the phrase too well. Layla told me all this one time when no one was in the waiting room except us. She said her brother came back without his mind. From then on, he shut himself in his room. He'd sit next to the open window, looking out onto the crowded street in Masakin Barze, and yelling at people. "Have you seen Hafiz al-Assad?" he'd ask them. "If you see him, tell him I won't leave my room until he comes to visit in person." No one paid any attention. Crazy, lost his mind. He'd urinate out the window and point his penis directly at whoever was passing, oblivious to their insults or swearing. Layla spent her days in that tiny waiting room, around people not dissimilar to her brother in one way or another. They had stories just as strange as his. She studied, scheduled appointments, drank Nescafe with milk, and smoked voraciously. Then she went home to care for her weak, bedridden mother, her divorced only sister, her niece, and her brother, who was a prisoner to his room and his madness. I often watched Layla and considered her sweet disposition, which radiated from her eyes despite everything around her. I imagined how hard it must be for someone to act as mother, father, doctor, and husband, and keep it all together. You'd think that their expression would show the strain of what they have to carry, crushed one minute, resilient the next, that their eyes might glaze over callously, then glow with sudden tenderness. But not Layla. I sat scanning each of the people in the waiting room. A young man in his early 30s arrived. Tall, broad shoulders, strong features as if they'd been drawn or even sculpted on his face. Thick hair, jet black. He had a broad chest, and I envied him his ribcage, that it could expand to hold so much air. I didn't feel real jealousy then, not in that first brief encounter. That feeling wouldn't come until we'd got to know each other better. You see, I was desperately afraid of suffocating, terrified by the thought of the air around me running out. Unable to take in any more, I'd die of asphyxiation while this man watched and took deep breaths to fill his own lungs, which were more spacious than those of ordinary people. Our rib cages have atrophied. Even at their best, they arch no further than our stomachs. I didn't particularly notice his muscles that day, how firm, sinuous, and prominent they were. When he flexed, you could see that he was obsessed with each one individually, that he'd worked to develop each muscle in isolation. That first day, most of this remained hidden under his heavy winter clothes. But at one point, he rolled up his sleeves and bared his forearms, and when I glanced down at them, they were so solid. I'm crazy about the area between the wrist and the elbow. That short stretch of skin sends me somewhere so expansive there's always enough space and enough oxygen. I'm enamored of bones, especially a body with prominent bones. I'm never drawn to people whose bones are hidden beneath soft flesh. I hunt for bulges on hands, wrists, and throats, the base of the neck, the collarbone. The collarbone? How can such an unwieldy word invoke such a warm, tender spot? When he sat down and bared his forearms, I saw the contours of his wrist bones, under soft skin lightly covered with black hair. I dropped my gaze to his feet. Jeans, hitched up a bit because he'd crossed one leg over the other. Between the top of one trainer and the bottom of his jeans, another bone budded. There was no clear or rational explanation for my obsession with bones. I didn't tell Camille that I love bones more than anything else. This man and all his bones sat in a metal chair covered with cheap brown leather. I looked at him. He didn't notice me. To be fair, he didn't seem to notice anyone. He lit a cigarette and went to ash it on the ground. Layla glanced at him, surprised. "There's an ashtray on the table in front of you," she said softly, cutting through the reverie he was drowning in. Thoughts as deep as the sea I later learned he feared. His eyes widened, but he didn't apologize. He just looked to the left at the chipped ashtray and stubbed out his cigarette, ignoring the ashes he'd purposefully let fall. He didn't bend down to clean the floor, but behaved as if he were on the street or in the park, where sooner or later a breeze would come to do the job. As if Layla weren't there. He didn't seem to consider that she'd be the one to sweep up his mess a few minutes later. I went in for my appointment with Camille. The whole time I spoke with him, it felt as if the man in the waiting room were listening to my life flowing out onto the pages of the little notebook on Camille's desk, where he recorded his incomprehensible symbols. I felt a heavy sadness that day. I'd planned to tell Camille about a strange dream from the night before, but I changed my mind. Was the stranger with prominent bones, sitting on the other side of the thin wooden door, the reason why? I didn't tell Camille that in my dream I'd been sitting on the roof of an old, low building in Damascus. The moon was full. I sat on the edge and wasn't worried about falling. I looked at the moon and was glad it was full, which surprised me, because I don't usually like the full moon. I don't like things that are round, finished, or whole. I like things lacking. Absence makes me feel complete. But that night, in my dream, I was glad about the full harvest moon, round as a piece of flatbread. It was whole. My soul was whole. The moon felt like a mirror, reflecting how full and complete I am. I usually punish myself obsessively for mistakes I may or may not have made, blame myself for things that are wrong with the world, hold myself partially responsible. Maybe just because I exist? Does my simple presence in this strange time make me responsible for some of its catastrophes? Then suddenly in my dream my heart dropped. Why would it not? The moon fell to the earth, and I felt my heart tumble down with it. The loss was painful, palpable. I saw a VW Beetle driving through the sky. Without the moon, the night was so dark. A man was at the wheel, and his wife was sitting next to him. I didn't know for sure she was his wife, but the resignation on her face made me think so. Do all married people look so resigned? The man driving his car through the sky was in his 60s, and his wife was about the same. But I didn't tell Camille about my dream. I fumbled and lost the desire to speak. Camille pressed me, questioned me.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?